Hello and welcome to the In Publishing podcast. Our guest this week is Ian Murray, the Executive Director of the Society of Editors, which has more than 400 members from across the media. We would like to thank our podcast sponsor, Acorn Web Offset, the Yorkshire-based specialist A5 and A4 magazine printer. With high-speed web offset and sheet-fed printing, together with in-house saddle stitching, perfect binding and mailing services, Acorn can cope with the most demanding of production turnarounds. Acorn prides itself on its efficiency and low-cost print production. For more information, visit acornweb.co.uk. Ian Murray has been Executive Director of the Society of Editors since October 2017, when he took over from founding director Bob Satchwell. Ian edited the Southern Daily Echo for nearly 20 years and was Editor-in-Chief of NewsQuest's Hampshire titles. Ian, welcome to the In Publishing podcast.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
So can we begin by asking a little bit about your career, your long career in regional and local newspapers, and how you got to where you are today?
Thank you for saying it's long. It is 4 decades, and they have swept by. And I started in local journalism on my local newspaper. And I often say, I always wanted to be a journalist. But in fact, I originally wanted to go into advertising. And the reason for that, I won't bore you all with. But I mentioned this to my careers teacher at the very good comprehensive school I went to. And he said, "Why do you want to do that, Murray?" He said, "I think you'd make a good journalist because let's look at the facts here. You're reasonably good at English. You can tell a good story. You are inquisitive, nosy. You've got a thick skin, and you can't spell. You're perfect for the job." Well, and actually, he's right. Thank goodness for sub-editors and spell check down the years. I'm sure I've got better, but that was it. And so when I began to look into it, I thought this is fantastic, and I did. I was so lucky to get a job on my local newspaper, where I learnt the trade at the end of a golden era, in weekly newspapers. Because what we didn't know was coming, no one knew, was the advent of it. One of the great hurricanes to blow through the newspaper industry at the end of the 70s and into the 80s, and that was the arrival of free newspapers in the country. Beforehand, they didn't exist, and you tell that to youngsters today, and they look at you blank. What world without free newspapers? Yes, they didn't exist. So, but I was lucky to do my training during that period, and it was well staffed. There were lots of reporters there, and so I had the time and the benefit of the wisdom of ages of the journalists that I worked with there, who taught me that. And one of the first things they taught me was, I was taught by my first news editor was, "Ian, anyone can get a story. It's the story that matters. And take your time and get the facts right and make sure it's balanced and be accurate." All those wonderful things of that kind of thing. So I did that for a while. Staying within the same company, which then became Boulevard newspapers, which are now the papers that I worked on in Stourbridge, in the West Midlands, and in Kidderminster, now belong to NewsQuest, which was funny because I did full circle and came back to NewsQuest after a while. But then I edited at the tender age of, I think, 26, and I was considered one of the youngest newspaper editors around at that time. I edited the Kidderminster Shuttle. So I edited the Kidderminster Shuttle for a few years, and then left. The usual tract then for a career was that after you'd been sort of the editor of a weekly newspaper, you then go on to be sort of a top table sub on a daily regional newspaper, and then you might move on that way. Well, I didn't actually want that. I wanted to get back to the news. So I set myself on a trajectory to become a news editor somewhere, and I thought, if I can make that, that's the pinnacle. And I did. I made it to become the news editor of the Bournemouth Echo, after having worked in Birmingham, and then eventually went on to be the managing editor of the Bournemouth Echo, before I was invited to take over to become the editor of the Southern Daily Echo in Southampton, and then for the last few years when I was there, was editor-in-chief of of that paper and a number of weeklies and magazines in the Newsquest empire in Hampshire and that region.
And you spent nearly 20 years as editor of the Southern Daily Echo. What stories and campaigns are you proudest of from that era?
Oh, they're endless stories. I mean, any good newspaper, and I like to think I don't want to boast about it because it was the team at Southampton and everywhere, and I'm sure it's the same with all newspapers. They were utterly fantastic, and always it was to champion the cause of those that didn't have a really strong voice. And so over the years, I remember that we were able to get justice for an awful lot of people who were struggling, usually against the machine, usually against the apparatus of, should we say, the local council or something like that, that they were just a number. But of course, once we got involved, the wheels moved sort of quite quickly. One of the issues that I feel most proud about was actually during the period that followed the Gulf War and then in Afghanistan and Iraq, and the Hampshire Regiment were returning, and they were going to march through the city. We're giving a march through the city, and the city council were, it's not as though they weren't supportive, but they weren't. We felt they weren't doing that much, and so we started a campaign to actually promote this and promote the fact that the lads and lasses were going to be marching through. And I think it came from the fact that I'd seen it in one town and hardly anyone turned out to actually do it. Anyway, cut a long story short, we promoted it. The council then came on board. They actually ensured that schools could have the day off and come down. And we got thousands and thousands of people, just thousands of people cheering them. And I just thought, fantastic, utterly fantastic.
Great.
It still moves me to tears to this day, as you can probably hear.
Oh, yes, a lovely memory. So you moved to the Society of Editors, and in 2017 you took over from Bob Satchwell. And how do you see your role there?
Well, yes, Bob. Bob, fantastic. I'd known Bob for more than 20 years when he was editor at Cambridge, and I had to remind him actually that he did offer me a job when I was just a young reporter, slightly younger than Bob, and he did offer me a job, and I actually turned it down. To which he said he couldn't remember at all. He couldn't remember that at all. But it was yes. I would have loved to have gone and worked with him at Cambridge, but it just didn't work for domestic reasons. So we'd known, and when we were then fellow editors later on, we were part of the old Guild of Editors, which then became the Society of Editors. And Bob very kindly, was very enthusiastic all the way through in supporting, inviting me to join the board. That would be about 15 years ago now. And then I became president of the society. And then Bob, unfortunately, had an illness which forced him to retire. And the board invited me to step into his shoes. And what shoes they are. I said from the very beginning, look, I can't be Bob. I'm not going to be Bob. No one can be Bob. He was such a powerful force for good in the industry. But they said, well, go on, give it a try. They're brave souls. So I stepped up to the plate, and hopefully I've done well. And the role of the society is evolving in many ways. It always should, and I think that's right, because the role of the media. But at its heart, it remains true to it. That is that we are there to campaign on behalf of press freedom, of freedom of expression, the public's right to know, even if sometimes they don't want to, public's right to know, of diversity in the newsrooms. That's been one of our platforms for a long time, and also high standards of training in the editorial world. And it's on the basis of that we campaign. We're not funded by any particular part of the industry. So when I go into battle, when I'm rolled out to go into battle on behalf of principles of editorial freedom, talking to government or other bodies, I'm not doing so on behalf of Mr. Murdoch or the Barclay Brothers or the BBC or Sky, although their organisations are represented on our board. I'm there not for those commercial reasons. I'm there for the principle.
Well, as you say, it's it's a tremendously difficult time for local and regional newspapers at the moment, with titles closing and job losses, which has been accelerated by COVID. What can you do as the Society of Editors to support the industry? And what do you think can be done more widely to ensure that local and regional news is still covered?
What a sweeping question! And if I had
Yeah.
all the answers to that, then obviously I would be heading up one of the major newspaper companies that are there. From the society's point of view, we can continue to hammer home the message, which we have always hammered home, that whether it be on a national level, because we represent broadcasters as well, as I've said, Sky and BBC and ITN that are there, but also very much on a regional level, on a local level. We keep on hammering home the importance of a free media, a trusted media. It's there to have the checks and balances on local democracy, to ensure we have open justice in this country. But it also is there to knit society and communities together. And we've had large numbers of incidences and reports to us during the present COVID-19 crisis of newspapers rallying, because their local communities have been coming to them and saying, we can't make head nor tails of this. Can you tell us what's going on? We're getting conflicting reports on things, but we trust you. We trust our local newspaper. And the reports that come out also show that in general, depends on what your flavour of national newspaper is. That's true also of national newspapers. The media has come out of this crisis really quite well in the sense of trust. From the surveys that have been done, in that providing that information, and it's building on that going forward. And to be fair, the government have recognised the role of the media. They have come forward with financial support for national and regional newspapers, about 35 million, I think, pounds in advertising to get their message across about the crisis, and it is recognised that the importance there, and I hope and believe that one of the very thin silver linings, terrible time we're going through, is that it has reminded of the value of their local free dependent media.
Well, you've talked about trust there, and there has been a real issue around this in recent years, particularly concerning fake news online, and discussion over what can be done to legislate against it. Um, you're obviously concerned about the risks of over-hasty legislation and censorship in general. Can you talk us through the issues and how you would like the government to proceed?
Yes, of course, as simply as I can. I mean, it's be careful for what you wish for kind of circumstances. The giant digital platforms, as we know, talking about Facebook and Google and Twitter, and then there are others that are coming along. They're out there, and they've created, not particularly those companies themselves, but the platforms have given the opportunity for there to be this spread of Wild West news and information, shall we say? A lot of it unregulated, although, again, to be fair, Google and Twitter and Facebook are bringing in, have brought in all kinds of checking and all kinds of methods of regulation that they're trying to bring in onto that. But it is seen that something more needs to be done. And the industry itself, the mainstream media, as we would say, see that and say, look, you stop. In a sense, why is it always the focus on the mainstream media, the easy targets for regulation? We must do something about it. And why not those areas? But it is very much a case of be careful of what you wish for. And we've got, for instance, the case of the present online harms bill, which is being prepared to be put before Parliament and to be discussed. And one of the areas there, I mean, no one can argue about the fact that something has to be done to clamp down on online where children are abused, adults are abused, or self-harm, or all the myriad of things that are there. But then when we come into the area of fake news, and politicians like to do this, we need to clamp down on fake news, misinformation, disinformation that's out there. That all sounds marvelous until you actually say, well, who is going to decide what is fake news? Who is going to decide what is misinformation and disinformation? And it's not very long before you actually get to some Orwellian style ministry of truth. We decide what's true. And you can't escape once you begin to go down that line of, and also there's a lot of discussion that goes on about where should support be? It should be support for news which is in the public interest. Public interest journalism. We hear a lot about that. Well, who's deciding what's public interest journalism? You see, I think public interest journalism covers most journalism that is out there. I can make a very good case for covering grassroots sport in a local
Yeah.
newspaper is public interest journalism, but that never crops up. None of that. It's all about the covering the local council. I totally agree. Covering the courts and the inquests. I totally agree. But if you're saying that those are only the ones in the public interest, so there's all those kinds of things. And if we're not careful in the rush, and only the last week we had the DCMS committee come out and say, "Come on, government, get your finger out. That we want the detail of this online harms bill. We need to clamp down on disinformation and misinformation. Let's have some action now. You've talked about it for long enough, and that's where the danger lies. In it comes, let's have some quick laws. Let's have some. But of course, we're not trying to affect freedom of expression or a free press, they say. And I genuinely believe that politicians aren't, most of them, aren't trying to do that. But that's the laws of unintended consequences. And even if you do succeed, the danger is where it's saying, well, no. What we're doing is we're putting pressure on the digital platforms. How do they? How do they react to that? And the simplest method for them, perhaps even the only method for them, is to actually come in with something where they use algorithms to look out for words and phrases and then block that from being there. But that is surely going to stifle and censor, stifle debate, and take away and may harm platforms of legitimate news outlets, newspapers, and broadcasters. So it's fraught with difficulty. There are no simple answers, and you only have to look at other countries around the world who've tried to do this. I think France have tried to do it. I think Australia have tried to do this. America doesn't, because it simply doesn't believe in anything that damages free speech. You've only got to see them try. The ones who tried to do this, they backed away because it is so complicated, and have said actually, well, go for it, Britain. We'll see what you come up with. Well, sometimes it's good to be pathfinders, trailblazers, and sometimes it's act in haste and regret at leisure.
But do you think that journalism has an image problem, that actually people, for right or for wrong, don't trust mainstream newspapers in the way that they used to do? And what can the industry do to help improve the public's trust in them?
Well, you're absolutely right. There's no point in me sitting here and when I'm, as I say, I'm rolled out and I talk on radio and TV and others about the industry, and that comes up. I have to say, well, yes, there is a problem with that, and to a certain extent, the industry has been its own worst enemy in some ways, and doing things not just in the way that perhaps it acted a couple of decades ago, when it was a little bit more forthright, shall we say, with things that were there. But also the fact that it hasn't been prepared to defend itself quite as well as it could do. Whether that some of it was to do with that, well, why should we defend it? It's obvious. A free media, a free press is absolutely vital. Nothing to see here. Move along, kind of thing. But it hasn't been held also. And one of the big roles of the Society of Editors is to point the finger at some politicians and those in positions to influence who, on the one hand, will quite often say, "Oh, well, we believe in a free press. Of course, we do. We believe in scrutiny of politicians. We believe in the covering of the courts and everything." But we don't believe in a press which attacks us. We don't believe that the press should be free to attack the things that we say. That, of course, is all fake news, and that undermines quite often the credibility of the media when you've got influencers, people in positions of power, saying, "Oh, it's all fake news. All fake news. Don't believe it. Don't believe it." So one of the things that we've got to do as an industry, I think, is fight back. And ironically, as I've said, the very thin silver lining to the COVID-19 has it has really underscored just how important having a strong media in this country is for finding out really what is going on. We also need, though, to fight back and say, look, this is it. And here are our credentials. This is it. We're trained. We're regulated. We stick within the law. That's not happening out there on the platforms. That's not happening in social media where, I mean, not blaming the companies, but I'm saying the social media where your friends are just putting things on there and or we've heard such and such, or people are actually, of course, deliberately misinformed and setting out the wrong ideas that are there. That's not happening there. So we are the people that are trained. We are regulated. We stick to the law. And we have to. And you can check us. And you can check with us. And what the industry's had to find to do is to more and more actually quantify and qualify where it's getting this information from. Look, you can trust this information because here are our sources. Click here and you can go to this. You can trust us on all these kind of things. And it's no bad thing that it's had to do that.
Well, you might already have answered this question, but you mentioned politicians, and obviously in the US, President Trump has been the media's biggest critic and describes the press as the enemy of the people. What would you say to him if you ever got the chance to meet?
What would I say to him? Well, I would say, Mr. President, because I think he deserves the respect of the job that he holds. I'm afraid that you're wrong. We are not the enemies of the people. The media, particularly in this country, are the defenders of the people and the public's right to know. But I suppose. President of the United States is held up. The President of the United States is held up as as the person who instigated and started this term of fake news. In fact, he himself claims the credit for, if you can call it that, for I invented the term fake news. Well, I don't think that's quite true. However, ultimately, if you look at Americans, and I very much admire an awful lot of the journalists in the United States. If you look at the way that they do approach it, it is quite partisan. And we're talking about broadcast here in particular. So he may have some credibility when he actually says they're all out to get me. There's no one on my side except for perhaps say Fox News, because they can be terribly partisan. And what we don't realize in this country is how blessed we are that we have a broadcast system that actually with news has to be and strives to be impartial and balanced. And we have a print media that, while it's free to be partisan, is required to be balanced, is required to show that there is a difference between, a clear difference between fact, news, conjecture, comment, speculation, is required to do that. And on the whole, very much on the whole, actually does that. So if I met the president, which I'm not likely to do, I would say, well, sir, I believe that you're wrong about that, and you are doing a great deal of harm, not just to the media, but to your people who need to have trust in the media.
Moving on to a different but equally important issue, you recently gave evidence about diversity in the media industry. And I wondered whether you think that our current newspaper industry is reflective enough of society as a whole, and if not, what more can be done about that?
I think that it certainly is not reflective enough of society as a whole, and the truth is behind this is that this has been known for a while, and it's not like it's been ignored. And certainly, I was aware of it when I was editing and was taking steps that I hoped would resolve the issue as best that I could. And I certainly know that throughout the industry, there have been steps that have been taken to try. And it's as if I think rather unfairly the industry will get blamed and say, well, aren't you aware? And can't you see that it's far better and just, but also practical for you to actually have a newsroom and therefore a news output which actually reflects better the communities that you serve? And to which the answer is, well, go figure. Of course we do. Of course we do that. It's how do we actually do it? And the most galling thing is, and I speak to quite a few people in the industry about this, the most galling thing is that we haven't achieved what we wanted to. Now, you could say, and I would agree, well, that's because it wasn't given the urgency that it required. We can look back now and say we really needed to double and treble the efforts that are there. And that is certainly going on now. With it throughout the whole of the industry, and the society is playing a role in that. We know all of this is going on, so we're reaching out to the industry and saying, please help us by telling us of what you are doing and what you have done and where your success stories have been and how you have achieved what you have achieved, so that we can create a database that helps the industry to do this rather than wasting time reinventing the wheel. And for also reaching out to individuals and organizations and saying, are you willing to help? Don't sit on the sidelines pointing fingers, please, and saying, why aren't you doing more? If you can help us, come and help us. Come and help us to do this, and let's connect you. Let's put you in touch with all of that that's there. So, in reflection, it's not a case of the fact that the industry doesn't realise that it has a challenge there. It's how to move forward on that challenge and saying, look, it's not been good enough. We've got to do more.
Yep, great. The UK is currently ranked at number 35 in the World Press Freedom Index. Why do you think we're not placed higher? And what steps would you like to see the government take to get us higher up the list?
Well, that's very good, and a few off-the-record conversations I have with people regarding that index there, which is one of the things is that we expect more, or it's expected that the UK would do better than some of the other nations which are based above us because of our long standing. So therefore, we're hoisted by our own petard. Well, I don't quite accept that. I mean, there might be a little bit of that that's there. There's also a case of, look, there's an awful lot more media here in the United Kingdom than some other nations, and so therefore there's an awful lot that needs to be got right. Okay, fair enough. So it's a bigger challenge, and we should be doing it. We should be doing it that's there. I think that effectively, yes, I think that we could have, again, it comes down to the will, it comes down to politicians. At the moment, there's a lot of good talk. There's a lot of good talk, and I think well-meaning and well-intentioned, about Britain leading the way with the global campaign for media freedom, which we partnered up with Canada to do. And when again I talk to members of the government and people in Whitehall about this and saying, you can see the irony of this, can't you? That we place ourselves there in a finger-wagging mode, saying, come on, you all ought to have a free press and treat freedom of the press more seriously out there. Yet we languish in the middle 30s all the time in this chart, in this table. They say, yeah, we see it, and those who, off the record again, will say, well, we don't mind having that stick to beat us with, because that's a good thing for us then to be actually saying, come on, what have we got to do? What could we do practically? Well, we could, for instance, government could finally, once and for all, scrap Section 40, which hangs over us, which, as you know, was the punitive damages that would be placed against any newspaper that didn't sign up, supposedly, to the voluntary, supposedly recognised under the Royal Charter regulator. So much for being voluntary if you're going to have punitive damages. There are other things that can be swept away. We've still got far too much secrecy in this country. Far too much. Yes, we've got freedom of information requests, but they take so long when they are actually answered. And in many cases, I'm sorry, what they're used for, anecdotal, but also my own experience is that you'll approach a body, be it the health body or it'll be a local authority, and you'll ask them for information, which you really should just get over the phone. We'll get back to you on that or whatever. And it's a put an FOI request in. Oh, that's going to drag on for so many weeks, is it? While you finally, if you bother to, it is ridiculous that we still hide so much, and also it's a case of, well, that's already on our website. Well, you try and find it. We are an open society. No, we're not. Tons and tons of information and news that even if it should be being released, made out there in a transparent way, it's hidden. It's hidden away. So there's plenty that can be done. To actually, by those in authority, that can actually make us much better when it comes it comes to press freedom. And we've seen some silly games that have been going on from the government at the start of the year with moving around with the lobby system. And the Society of Editors at that time said, we hope this doesn't lead to the exclusion of certain news outlets. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. So they've rowed back from that immediately. But we can see this, and we've seen some during the COVID crisis. It stopped happening now, I'm pleased to say, where it's made, well, we're not going to answer questions from certain campaigning newspapers, which was shorthand for papers which are asking us awkward questions that we don't like. Every time you do that, that knocks us back down that list.
Well, I was going to ask, you've been at the forefront of complaints about changes to the lobby system. I mean, can you expand on that a bit more and why it's so important?
Well, it it is important because it's the only way really that it allows the media, to those who don't know what the lobby system is, basically it's those who are accredited can meet with government advisors that can give briefings of just what is going on in Parliament. What is the government's intention? What is it doing? It can answer questions and all those kinds of things. And what the government those can be sort of like uncomfortable in some ways, and almost difficult for the government to control, which is a good thing. So governments always like to control the message as much as possible. It takes a brave government to sort of like say we really don't care. That's there, and so initially for pragmatic reasons, supposedly these the lobby meetings take place twice a day during the week, in the morning and in the afternoon. And at the beginning of the year, with very little consultation, the government moved the afternoon one down to Downing Street, number 11. Was it number 9 Downing Street? Number 9 Downing Street, which meant that the lobby correspondents in the afternoon had to all troop from Westminster. Not a long distance, I know, but they had to leave just at the time that Westminster was waking up, and Prime Minister's question times, all those kinds of things were going on. And also because it's in Downing Street and not in the House of Parliament themselves, it can be controlled. And as we said, we feared, well, they can say, well, you can come in, but you can't, which then they promptly did, and which saw a walkout of all the lobby correspondents, even the ones that were allowed in. So, well, we're not coming in if you don't let the others in there, which was fantastic. Now, of course, the government have announced that they're going to move to a daily press briefing, White House style, before the cameras and live and all that kind of thing. How transparent, they say. Yeah, but once again, you could restrict the number of questions, choose who you're going to go to, and you can close down the whole thing, and so you can contain it. So on the one level, it looks extremely transparent, doesn't it? And yes, no doubt some government spokesman, the Prime Minister, will be caught out and made to look uncomfortable. But on the other level, they've got an awful lot more control over it than they used to have. So is this a good thing? Shall I be naive and err on the side of I'm sure this is done with the best of intentions, but we'll probably end up with the laws of unintended consequences. That's me being very generous.
Is a government led by a former journalist good for press freedom, do you think?
Well, it's good for us in the Society of Editors in the sense that when we write to the Prime Minister about any issue, and we try not to bombard him with too many letters, we can actually add in there, as a former journalist yourself, you will be aware.
Which I bet he loves that.
Yes, it is quite good in that sense. Gamekeeper turned poacher, or poacher turned gamekeeper, depending on how you want to look at it. He certainly knows his way around the media. So I think on reflection, the two things will sort of counterbalance themselves. It's good to have someone who understands the media, and I genuinely believe this. I genuinely believe that he buys into a free media and a free press, and is supportive in that sense. And in that sense, it's absolutely good, vital that we have someone right at the very top who understands how important a free media and a free press. I do hope I'm not wrong about that. I don't believe I am at the moment.
And politicians aren't the only powerful players who have refused to talk or answer questions from certain media outlets. We also have other figures in the public eye, for example, Prince Harry and Meghan, who have decided for whatever reason they don't always want to talk to the press. How would you like to see the press respond when such instances occur?
Well, of course, it's very tempting, isn't it, to say that the best way of doing it is to say, well, if you don't want to talk to any of us, or some of us, then that's fine. None of us will talk to you, and we'll just ignore you. We'll just ignore you. And there's quite a few people that say that, particularly outside of the industry. That's never really a sensible way of doing it, and you deny the public then the news. The news. If you took that attitude with anyone who turns around, there's an awful lot of people who would say, "Yeah, well, thank you very much." Yes, I mean, how do you deal with this? Well, you just continue on, and you continue to show up the ironies. I think, look, when someone in the public eye does something good, I think the media should reflect that and say, "Here's something," and they're doing some good work for charity and whatever it is. Um, and that's to be fair. And I think I feel that with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex that has been the case and continues to be the case. That even those publications that they are at odds with are still running articles of the good charity works that they are doing. Maybe out and about in Los Angeles, helping out with, I think, food distribution and things like that. But that should never, ever prevent any news organization from pointing out if they think, well, there's maybe a bit of hypocrisy here, or is this right that this should be going on? And for any individual, organization, body to believe that that they can control, that they can only have the nice things written about them, and that anything that is critical of them is unwarranted and an intrusion into their privacy, I'm afraid is on a hiding to nothing, and so they shouldn't be. Obviously, there is a difference between people who, say, members of the royal family who are famous people but are not celebrities. Once made very forceful to me by someone from the royal household, not a member of the family, I hasten to add, that they are famous people, but they're not celebrities. And I think that's absolutely true. Whether or not the Duke and Duchess of Sussex are now moving themselves into the world of celebrities is another question that's there. But if someone says, right, I'm not going to talk to you, well, as I say, you can either say, right, well, in that case, I'm going to ignore you, which I think that just denies the public. That denies them the news and the information that they should have. I think it should be a case of, well, we're still going to report on you, and we will still make it absolutely as accurate as we can. We will still come to you for a comment, still give you the opportunity, but we will do it. And I remember at one of the papers I was editing, as is quite the norm, we fell out with the chairman of the local football club, who barred us from attending. Which is usually marvellous because it shows you're doing your job. But we would still phone up whenever we had a story and say, "What does the club think of this?" And they would say, "I don't know why you're phoning us for. We're never going to give you an answer." And we said, "Because we want to give you the opportunity of giving us an answer. So it can never be said that we didn't give you that opportunity." And eventually all things even out.
Yes, yeah. Coming on to press finances, which has been another difficult area in recent years. Firstly, the impact of social media platforms on the more mainstream media. How would you like to see them regulated?
The social platforms, again, be careful. Be careful with that. There are those that really want a heavy hand of regulation. From the Society of Editors' point of view, we've always argued for our own industry's point of view for self-regulation, So it's difficult and would be unjust for us to turn around and say, but for you, there should be, regulation imposed from on high and on above. It's much better to actually come to a position where you've got self-regulation that effectively fits within guidelines and areas that enable it to work for both sides. I mean, it comes really onto the online harms. It comes into areas of, I know there's big debates over are the digital platforms paying their way when it comes to obviously tax, when it comes to paying for the content that they use that's created by elements of the media. Those are very important areas, and we're seeing more and more conversations that are taking place about that in that way. I don't come from a position that says that there must be draconian regulation, because I think that is counterproductive, and I think that it can be a win-win situation. After all, the industry is has a lot of benefits from working with and the involvement of the digital platforms that are there, but there's definitely, particularly from the revenue point of view, they have been a challenge, shall we say. But we are where we are, and I think we just need to be careful that we don't go forward in a way that stifles matters too much, that we can find things that are beneficial to both sides.
Another great challenge has been COVID-19, which has decimated advertising and at the same time has prevented people from going out and buying particularly local and regional newspapers in the way that they used to, or picking up their free newspapers at stations, in the case of the Evening Standard in London. Of the various different funding suggestions about what we can do to ensure that we have a viable newspaper industry going forward, which ones do you think are the best?
I think it's horses for courses, and one size doesn't fit all. We've seen great amount of success from the local democracy initiative, where it's funding from the BBC, which funds something like, I think, 150 local journalists working in the regions that are there, and we've got something similar with about 80 journalists so far from the Facebook journalism project, where local community reporters working within the local media in that sense. And I think more of the same of that would be quite good. There's a lot of consideration going on around putting more bums on seats in courts, on the press benches in courts, and I would say also inquests are just as important for that. So any expansion that's there, and it's a case of where does the money come from? One of the big question marks over it, and one of the great imponderables at the moment, is how much public money, and the BBC's money is public money at the end of the day. And if other funding comes in that way, so say, for instance, one of the discussions is we take money off when I say we, I mean probably the government, or in some form will take money off the digital platforms to then reinvest, rather like Facebook are already doing, but on a larger scale, back into the regional press in particular, but maybe elsewhere in that sort of sense. But how do you get that? Again, once you take it, it becomes public money. And there is unease that if you're beholden on public money all of the time, then now you become beholden on the politics that basically comes with it when you wish to be free of that in that way. So I don't think there's one size fits all. I think it is what we don't want to create here is a media in this country which is totally dependent on handouts, beholden to a begging bowl for the government, or for things, for anywhere else, to just, at their whim, and for charity to be handing it out. What we need to do is to progress forward now and say, yes, we may need some support to get to it, but let's get to a position now where we are viable again, much more than at present. Although I don't want to say that the media is on its knees. It is not on its knees. No. It's not drinking in the last chance saloon. It is not there, but we can move to a more viable long-term future, and that is, yes, going back to addressing the situation of a more equitable distribution of advertising and funding for payment for content.
So when you look ahead, what excites you most about the outlook for newspapers in this country?
Oh, what excites me? Well, I think I'm very optimistic because of what's gone on during the COVID-19. Now, it sounds absolutely dreadful to say that, but you know what I mean, because I've said it's a very thin silver lining, but it is a silver lining in the way that there has been an awful lot of support for the media, not just on a local level, but on a national level. I mean, we've seen things like the Telegraph, for instance, who didn't put anyone on furlough, and I think announced that they were paying back. I think there were initial loans at the beginning, and they were paying that back because they didn't want it because I didn't put any journalists on furlough, but I think they might have put others on because they said no, it's been fine. It's been fine. We don't need to be beholden. We're going to pay this money back. So we've seen it in that way. So I think that going forward, it's in that way. And we've also seen that the take up for subscriptions for national newspapers and now also regional newspapers has been fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And what we have seen course of COVID-19 and the crisis that we've been in is the acceleration of the plans that were already in place or by the regional newspaper groups to accelerate putting their papers behind paywalls, which they now feel comfortable. They're more assured that they can do that than they would have been quite some time ago, because the public have come to really actually value this. I'd actually miss this. Paying something like £4.99, which I think is what the West costs for their papers a month, for your daily paper delivered to you on the website for a month, although they are giving the COVID-19 news still free. That in the days of that we're used to paying for Netflix and Amazon Prime and things like that, whereas beforehand it might have been a case of, well, if I don't get it for free, I'm not interested. I think it's a case of, well, actually, yes, we do value this and we do like it. And, earlier on, I was one of those editors when the internet first came along, and they said, oh, you're going to have to put all your content on for free, who did a double take and went, I'm sorry, beg your pardon? All this hard work that we do, you want me to give it away for free? And yeah, we do. I'm so skeptical. But then as the time went by, it was a case of, I could see now, we've got to build an audience. And that's what happened. And there are some people that say, oh, we should have had paywalls right from the very beginning, even with regional newspapers. Well, setting aside the fact that the difficulty of how do you cope then with the BBC websites locally, which are very good, and of course you don't have to pay to go on those because you've already got paid through the license fee. Discuss. Putting that aside, you just wouldn't have had the audience. But now the audiences are so huge to regional news sites that you can say, well, come on, you enjoy all this. We don't ask you for very much, but pay for it and you value it. So I think that the future is good. I think that it's going to be a close run thing for some titles where the internet and the revenue and the paywalls and the subscriptions actually insured into profitability, and that we know that there's some pain coming because some of the large groups have announced redundancies. But I'm optimistic that we will go forward and continue to be incredibly relevant papers, whether they're national, regional, local, or hyper local, which are now emerging. You see, nature abhors a vacuum. People are just really interested. We're always interested. We're nosy. We want to know what's going on. We want to know what's going on. And so where there's the disappearance of local media, then new media crops up there. New hyperlocal sites are appearing in those sort of areas. But the good old trusted local regional papers still got a huge brand, a huge following, and the national newspapers are doing incredibly well as well, I think. I don't want to paint it, oh, everything's fantastic. Yes, it's going to be hard work, but I am optimistic.
Finally, as someone who works in the newspaper industry and has done throughout your career, what do you read or listen to or watch to relax at the end of the day?
That's a very good question. Obviously, when it comes to switching off the computer and stop reading the newspapers that I've been reading, and I read as many as I can. I read the sites, Guido Fawkes, Politico, all kinds of sites that are there. My wife is very relieved when we settle down in front of the TV and lot of the time Netflix and Amazon Prime these days. But yes, still BBC. There's some fantastic programs on there and things. I tend to have to sort of catch up on Panorama, and that, because this is time away. My wife's not a journalist. Away from that, but my reading for relaxation, I tend to have like one historical novel on the go at the same time as a thriller or something like that. So my historical one is The Quest for Queen Mary, which was edited by Hugo Vickers, which is marvelous insight into the life of the aristocracy of about 60, 70 years ago. And usually I'm reading something that is a John Grisham or something on the side as well. My absolute sneaky pleasure, though, is I will then late at night, if I'm on my own, I will go onto YouTube and I will watch some of the foreign news broadcasts, which are then condensed down into a short news tube program, of course, particularly the English-speaking ones. I'm not very good at foreign language, so the ones from the United States and Australia and other places, and Canada. So, because I'm fascinated in how they tell their news, and particularly, of course, if they tell any news about us, it's always fascinating to see how others actually see us in that way. So sometimes I could probably tell you more about what's going on in Seattle than I can what's going on in Scarborough.
So basically, you're a news junkie.
I'm afraid so. But my wife knew that when she married me.
Yes. Great. Well, Ian Murray, thank you very much for joining us on the In Publishing podcast today.
Thank you.
A big thank you again to Acorn Web Offset for sponsoring this podcast. If you're looking for a new magazine printer, then check out their website at acornweb.co.uk or contact Matt Carey on 07714 299 105 or by email at matthew.carey@acornweb.co.uk. Thank you to Ian for being our guest this week. For more information about the Society of Editors, go to societyofeditors.org or follow them on Twitter, where their handle is @editorsuk. In Publishing publishes a free weekly email newsletter, In Pub Weekly, which you can register to receive at our website, inpublishing.co.uk. Thank you for listening, and please join me next week on the In Publishing podcast.